I'm just like, wow, my friend, this ability that you have because of this philosophy you've just described, this intention to serve, not just like a small group, but like millions. It's just profound.
You know, you refer to me as a wizard, which when I think about everything that exists in my life, I look at it through the lens of giving has given me everything that I've got. I can't really take credit for any of it. And that's what's kind of channeled my belief in a higher purpose and a higher power. And it's honestly the main thing that kind of keeps me going.
Welcome to Deeply Well. I'm Devi Brown, and this is your soft place to land on your journey. This is a podcast for those that are curious, that are creative, and that are ready to expand in their higher consciousness. This is where we heal. This is where we become. Welcome to the show. Today's show, been looking forward to this one. Our special guest today is a really amazing being that has committed themselves to a path of service in a variety of ways. Ajay Relan is an investor, an entrepreneur, and a community builder. Prior to Slauson Co, Ajay was a founding partner at Queensbridge Venture Partners. With a keen focus on brand building and storytelling, Ajay's passion lies in identifying trends and engineering culturally aligned brands. A lifelong Angeleno and graduate of UC Santa Barbara, Ajay has established a business portfolio grounded in community. His most recent collaboration, Hilltop Coffee and Kitchen, has become a staple, facilitating productivity and collaboration in diverse neighborhoods across Los Angeles. In 2012, Ajay founded #Lunchbag, a grassroots movement that has fed 1 million plus hungry and unhoused people in 150 cities around the globe. And everything that I just read doesn't even scratch the surface on who he is. Welcome to the show, Ajay.
The incredible intro. I think even hearing the bio is something that, you know, as we do the types of work that we do, it's easy to get lost in the day-to-day execution and management and, you know, seeing all of the ideas through. So it's grateful to be in a space where not only do I get to hear and reminded of the work and, you know, through somebody else's buttery voice, but also, you know, have the ability to share and hopefully, you know, contribute to what it is that, you know, that you're building that I'm also a very big fan of. But in terms of your question, in terms of what is my operating philosophy, I kind of boil everything down to this phrase of, you know, feeding people and, you know, connecting the dots going back, I guess, the past decade and some change, kind of stumbling on this realization that service is really the reason why we're all here. So when I say feed people and I think about these 3 different buckets that you've kind of, you know, perfectly encapsulated and laid out, it's, you know, between, you know, investing and philanthropy and hospitality and the restaurant business, feeding people, you know, starting backwards with the hospitality business, we feed people as a business model. We provide quality product in an amazing environment that is conducive for connection and community, and we are feeding people in exchange, you know, it's the product and the good and the service that we provide in exchange for that value. On the philanthropic front, you know, we started off with this program that focuses on, you know, as the obvious focus is around food insecurity and creating awareness around homelessness. So we're effectively feeding people that may not necessarily be able to feed themselves in that moment. And while even providing the people that are volunteering their time and their resources the opportunity to feed an inherent need that I believe and we believe we all have within each and every one of us, which is, you know, something that there's 170 religions in common. They only really have one thing in common, which is, you know, love your neighbor and help them if they need help and be, you know, so there's no real giver and receiver in that transaction. We believe we provide people the opportunity to be of service, and in that way they're feeding their own humanity. And then lastly, through this, latest venture with Slauson Co, I believe that, when our focus around this idea of economic inclusion and providing opportunities for a wider variety of entrepreneurs that come from backgrounds that have just historically not given the look, or had the opportunity to have their perspective represented in the products and the services that we all consume, we're in a position to be able to feed people capital, and provide scaffolding and resources and expertise that we have access to the entrepreneurs that we invest in, to build, the next Google or Facebook or Uber or something like that. So, but yeah, when I lay up at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering how the hell I got, so lucky, but also, the journey that we've been on to kind of get to this point, and then obviously all of the goals that we've set for ourselves, the feeding people and being of service is kind of the core imperative of everything.
I remember having lunch with you right before you launched everything you said on this list. Like, I remember being able to be a witness for those things, and the way that God aligned our paths for me to be a witness and an audience to you sharing the passion behind what you were about to build right before you built it. So I remember that experience. I remember we got gelato right before you launched hashtag. And I remember you telling me about the experience that led you to that point, and this breakthrough thought that came in about wanting to feed people. And this is even before we found ourselves really deepened in the crisis that we are in Los Angeles with all of the things happening with our unhoused community. And I remember you describing it to me, and then you just started it. And like, it instantly became this powerful, powerful movement that not just fed those in need of a nourishing meal, but feeding the actual soul and spirit of the hundreds of people that would show up as volunteers, and then watching that spread. And I remember I was living in Houston at the time. I remember, meeting someone saying, "Oh, we got connected with this big movement called hashtag, and we're going to do this thing." And I was like, "My friend built that." Like, what? And then being able to say today on paper that you have positively affected the lives of well over 1 million people since you launched that, right? So that's one memory. Then I remember sitting with you, and you hit me when I had just moved back to LA, and you're like, "Meet me in Inglewood. I'll be here." And I was like, okay. So I get in the car, I meet you in Inglewood. We go and sit for lunch, and you pulled out a napkin. And on the napkin, you drew out the concept for Hilltop. And you told me the vision, and you told me what you wanted people to feel. This is before there was any funding for it. And you're like, "And actually walk with me down the street, because this is where I think I want to do it." So we're just walking down the street, and you point it out, and I see it come to life through your voice. I see it come to life through that napkin, through your vision. And now to shoot forward several years later, and you have expanded monumentally. How many locations do you have now of Hilltop?
We just opened our 4th location, and we have a 5th one that's going to be opening in a couple weeks.
Wow. And you get to see powerful living legend voices like Issa Rae's championing this place, also an investor in the business. And, you're seeing it featured on television. You're seeing, when I go visit a Hilltop now, and I just walk in as a guest looking to order, and I see people coming to life within themselves as they're sitting in there, as they're eating this delicious food, but being in this spirit of creativity. I mean, I'm just like, wow, my friend, like this ability that you have because of this philosophy you've just described, this intention to serve, and the way the universe conspires on your behalf with your vision to serve not just like a small group, but like millions. It's just profound. And I hope you know that. I hope you know how you're being seen. I hope you know the effect that your life is having on so many people.
The 2 things that have thoughts that I just contemplate often. Some I state pretty publicly on a regular basis. But if you can look at each individual and if you believe the statement that your lived experience is your competitive advantage, and it's something that gives you a unique perspective. And then if you couple that with the idea that a lot of the things that we get to experience, or products or services or nonprofits or whatever it is, I also have a firm belief that a lot of the best things that exist in the world exist because whoever, was a key driver of those, things existing, a lot of that comes from a lot of personal passion mixed with a lot of pain that people have kind of, experienced and channeled into their creations, into their experiences. And that's certainly something that's true for me. And it's something that, something that I consistently have to pinch myself with when I truly sit down and take inventory of all of the ways that I get to spend my time, the people that I get to spend my time with, the conversations that we're having, the things that we're willing into existence, the people that we're enrolling into the journey, present company included. I wish I could say I was like just swimming in gratitude. It's often, lost because you're focused on, I got to make it. I can't let people down. I got to execute. Why isn't this but I think that, a lot of the things that I get to work on today exist, and they can't, and a lot of the things that when you said you vividly remember the early stages of these things were all born within a relatively short window. Right. Whether it started the very first, when we were able to successfully, purchase our first restaurant, to when I made my first angel investment that turned into, my first venture fund, to the moment that my therapist recommended that I go out to volunteer as a way to cope with some personal shit that I was going through.
Yeah.
Which led to and a lot of them, quite frankly, were impulsive. There's a word that you always kind of label me with that is equally like humbling and makes me a little uncomfortable, is you and I appreciate it, is you refer to me as a wizard. And a lot of those, and I'm not saying that in a way, but when I think about that word and I think about like a lot of the things that exist in my life, including like my beautiful family, which when I think about everything that exists in my life, I look at it through the lens of giving has given me everything that I've got. And everything that I've done has almost been impulsive with as very little thought, which is not something that I would recommend anybody do when choosing a life partner or starting a family or starting a business. But for my journey specifically, I can't really take credit for any of it, if that makes any sense. And that's what's kind of channeled my belief in a higher purpose and a higher power. And it's honestly the main thing that kind of keeps me going, day in and day out.
Something that you just mentioned is, some of the ways that pain can fuel. How has pain expanded you?
I think, something my wife has said to me, who's, the polar opposite human, and like we're the perfect people for each other. I hope I'm as good to her as she is to me. But it's like, there's like this statute of limitation on like your childhood trauma, right? It's what you kind of choose to do with those experiences, the things that may have made you feel not worthy or unlovable, or, in my case, like there's only a matter of time before people find out who I really am and they're going to abandon me. These things that, fester in our minds that, might have been true at one point, that were used as a survival tactic, that, I wish I could say everything that I've created came from a pure place of wanting it to exist for the world to enjoy. That's certainly a major part of it. If I'm being completely honest, a lot of these things were created, a good chunk of my intention behind them in the earliest stages were needs for validation. And like, and being able to have the ability or the types of friendships that I mean, we've seen each other through multiple iterations of each other. You were not this person that I sit in front of, that I get to talk to on a daily basis, that I get to learn from in your current form when I met, and vice versa. And to have the pleasure of having a front row seat to somebody's growth, to see how they consistently level up day in and day out and year in and year out is an absolute joy. And it's inspiring for me, when being honest and vulnerable and transparent and aware of what is all of the composition of the intention that goes into any given project, and being able to be honest with that with the people that I get to collaborate with, even though it might be uncomfortable, even though it might seem, it's a liberating thought, and it's a liberating feeling. And when, all of the things that you mentioned, now they all make sense. Now there's almost like, a friend of mine credited me the other day. It's like, you've kind of built this perfect flywheel for your life. And it's almost like these three buckets where you spend your time are seemingly could not be more different from each other. But the way that, we get to orchestrate, or, speaking in the first person, I've been able and fortunate enough, whether I intentionally did it or not, to orchestrate my life and where I get to spend my time. All of these things now holistically are tied at the hip and benefit from each other. And, whether you're comparing, selling a cup of coffee, or providing somebody hungry with a meal, or cutting $1 million investment into an early stage startup, it's all the same shit, and it's all coming from the same place. And that's something that I get to be grateful for on a daily basis.
Wow. What's so interesting about what you said is that it illustrates so perfectly, I think, God's intention for how purpose is meant to move in our lives, right? And it's like, it is anchoring into the value. It's anchoring into the greater philosophy that we come to based on our life experience, and connecting those experiences with our skills, with some innate gifts, a lot of blind trust, right? Like just kind of a tenacity of spirit. But then when you tap into that purpose is never one thing. It's a vehicle to everything, purpose. Having those three different, and this is just some of it, y'all, but having those three different like buckets that I kind of activated at the top of this episode that we've been speaking to, you fit perfectly into all of them, even if all of them don't have to fit and make sense with one another, because the guiding piece is the purpose. It is the tapped in ability you've come to within yourself, mixed with vision, mixed with creativity, and resilience. And then you serve in a multitude of capacities. How's that feel?
Pretty good. It's great to hear. I mean, and the cool thing, and I'd say, we're all watching our own movie, and we're all more the same than we are different. And if you're a human being that cares about the contribution that you get to make to this world during your short time here, it's a long journey and a painful journey, and one that you should always proceed with caution with, because it's something you and I talk about. Like, once you kind of have that realization that there's more out there, that there's a place that you can come from that is coming, through this lens of like who you actually are versus who it is that you think other people want you to be, and trying to fit into the mold. I think there's a significant percentage of the population that kind of falls into that bucket. But if you recognize that there are bigger opportunities for you, if you recognize that you are worthy of those opportunities, and if you accept the fact that it's not going to be pretty, and you decide to embark on that journey of knowing, the thing that sucks about knowing is once you know, you can't unknow.
Yeah.
And then you're in this kind of like purgatory vibe. The thing that you and I were talking about the other day is, I think I've spent a lot of time accumulating a lot of knowledge, and whether it's reading books or going to different like whether it's a Vipassana meditation retreat or something else. And it's like you're filling up your toolbox with all of these tools. And sometimes you kind of conflate that with the wisdom of actually implementing those tools into every single thought that goes through. And that shit is painful.
Talk that talk.
And you realize that it's also that purgatory is also like that part of the journey, right? And it's like, being patient and wanting to get there, which is wherever there is, or like this supreme state of enlightenment or success or the bag that you think that you deserve that you don't have yet, and all of the low frequency things that are pre-programmed in you from that pain that we talked about earlier, that you're like, oh yeah, I'm still unlearning that. And then being patient with yourself. And now I'm going on a tangent, but I think it all, and all that to say is like, you take the time to like, be patient with yourself. Don't shit on yourself. Don't shit on other people if they're not on the same journey. Don't judge. You know what I mean? It's just like one day at a time.
Can I tell you the visual display that was happening for me inside as you were saying that?
Please.
It's, and this is something this is something I probably speak about every day, but I definitely speak about it on this show. It's like taking the elevator down from your head into your heart, right? Like sometimes we can get so focused on, what we are collectively calling the healing journey right now. We can get so focused on the acquiring of tools, and then we want to put them in this nice, neat toolbox, and we're all walking around carrying a fucking box of tools all day, right? Like we decide to instead get rid of the chip on our shoulder, but carry a massive toolbox on our shoulder that we're not opening. So we have all of this intellectualized information. We have all of this knowledge, and we don't allow it to become wisdom that emits from us because we're not choosing to actually open the box and take out the tools and hold them and use them in real time, and that's the piece that significantly changes everything. It goes from the, oh yeah, I know that. Oh yeah, I read a book like that. Oh yeah, because that theory says this and da-da-da. And it actually becomes a thing that you're not talking about because you're living, breathing it. It's pouring out of your cells and your pores. And, and that's the part I wish for everyone to have the immense pleasure and freedom to come into. That's the part that shifts it all. And it takes time, and it takes concerted effort. It takes real practice. That's the deeper layer of the experience of healing. It's, okay, I have the knowledge, but now let me also live it, which brings up a lot of things, because then you get triggered as you're trying to live it, and you have to meet those triggers with an immense amount of care and self-compassion. An immense amount of disarming, of tenderness,
Yeah, and it can certainly get frustrating, right? If you're not, so I'd say, another thing that we have in common is we have, we're parents to young children.
Yeah.
And among the lots of, and again, if you choose to go down this path of, for me, I made a commitment early on when my daughter was born that, whatever my generational shit is stops with me, which is a completely other added weight that you kind of put onto your plate. But that's probably the most important one, because you are able to kind of like look back and recognize, though well-intentioned, our parents only knew what it was that they knew, and they got that from their parents and so on and so forth. And as amazing,
and the societal influence, like we can't not speak to the fact that even our parents doing our best, they are still at the mercy of what the collective consciousness is, what society is allowing for any and all of us.
And what's beautiful, I think, about our generation, and, maybe I live in a bubble, but it feels like, and maybe I'm just more blessed than others because I've, created a sense of authentic purpose in everything that I do that's kind of filtered out the people that aren't asking the questions that we ask. But, to be able to raise a young child, and we all know that when they get to a certain age, they have a lot of questions, and it really forces you to kick the tires on your understanding of like basic shit. And there's nothing more humbling than having to explain something that you thought you knew, whether, whatever it might be. It could be something very specific and objective to something that's more philosophical. But either way, they're going to ask you until they get an answer. And we get to check what we truly understand or what we thought we understood and how we want to reframe that information at the earliest stages for our children to have to frame their worldview, to make sure that they're, learning concepts like gratitude or being present, two things that those are not my default setting, right? Those are two, like, I am not, wherever I am not there the majority of the time. And the only thing that I have is I am aware of that. So I get to go through that super meta process of like analyzing my thoughts and realizing, so that's a whole nother thing. But I think the ability to choose to go down that path of parenting in order to, at the very least, incrementally save your offspring some of the shit that you had to go through, while not holding it against your parents.
Yeah.
Because in them doing the best that they could have done, given the tools that they had. So.
Yeah. Or holding whatever you want to hold against, but creating space inside so that you're alleviated for whatever internal suffering may be present. On this winding road, this pathway I'm seeing in front of me right now, where I would love to start is, tell me a little bit more about Slauson Co.
Sure. So Slauson Co. high level is a early stage venture capital firm. It's rooted in this idea of economic inclusion. It was started by myself and my good friend of over 20 years, Austin Clements. Both of us grew up, in South Los Angeles. Spent a lot of time together in our high school years. Stayed in touch. Both of us completely separate paths. He's a lot more direct and intentional into this world of venture capital. And then both of us growing up where we grew up and often kind of congregating at various like life events for friends and family members, always kind of catching up in that specific lane, but then also independently sharing our philanthropic work and supporting, I shared some of mine. His was more, specifically focused on the tech and the venture capital community here in Los Angeles and challenging people to think more inclusively and to implement practices and primarily through his role being the founding chair of a program called Pledge LA, which was partnered with the Annenberg Foundation here in LA. But, it was something that we had always, whenever we would get together, always thought about this massive opportunity to invest in entrepreneurs that didn't necessarily fit the Silicon Valley mode, that didn't go to Stanford or were a Caucasian male. The majority of this money, I think 80% of it at least, goes to white men in 6 geographies. So the thesis that we would constantly kick the tires on was that innovation exists outside of this demographic and these geographies, and we believe that with our experiences working at starting a firm like Queensbridge Venture Partners with some incredible close friends that are still close friends to this day, to his experience working at a firm like 10110, which is a extremely successful Los Angeles-based firm, and kind of combining the things that we cared about to formulate something. And we've been able to get some incredible investors involved behind what we do, from some of the founders of the largest tech companies over the last 2 decades to luminary investors that have been, first institutional checks into products and services that a lot of us interact with on a daily basis, and kind of entrusting us to kind of become that bridge between the institutional knowledge that has fueled the innovation that this country was built on over the last, call it 50 to 100 years, but then being authentically connected to the communities that we want to unearth this next generation of like Mark Zuckerbergs, if you will, from, and provide them with the same opportunity you can't catch what you can't see. And I think that we're building a brand in the market that is built on trust, authentic connections to the people, both on the institutional side that want to help, but might not socially be connected to the communities that they want to impact, and being authentically connected to the streets that we came from.
I mean, damn.
Yeah, it's pretty tight.
Wow. I had the chance to spend time with some really incredible companies that you're invested in this past summer. Shout out to Austin. What up? You guys had a Slauson Co summer camp.
Mm-hmm.
So you took over this really gorgeous property in the forest. And I came up and I led some meditations and we frolicked in the forest. That was one very lovely. Like, I think everyone, just as adults, we need to make more time for like interesting field trips like that, to just like go to be together with trees,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a really cool experience. I mean, that was really boring. Our firm is only, we started in January of 2021, so we haven't, in the grand scheme of things, we haven't been around that long. But we have an incredible team. And, we're still very much in the experimental phase, where we have ideas of things that we think might be cool ways to bring our communities together and have some sort of like a culture clash, or something that's not necessarily like, the norm. And the idea for creating a Slauson summer camp was kind of rooted in this idea of like, we started our firm like still very much in the pandemic. Everything was very virtual, and the bulk of the relationships that we had started, both with the limited partners that invested and trusted us with their capital to be stewards of their capital to find these founders and these companies that we're backing. We just didn't have the opportunity to spend much time in person. And I think as we kind of went down the path of building these relationships, and, we position ourselves as somewhere between a coach and a cheerleader for the founders that we back. And, you're on these Zooms all day long. There might be like that random, like 3 or 4 minute Zoom, time left at the end, where you're just like, so how are you? Like, what's going on? And then you'll hear stories like, oh, I'm getting a divorce, or my child won't talk to me, or explain some sort of loss, or some just shit that you had no idea that they were going through, which, by the way, is everybody. And, you're also reflecting, in a lot of these conversations we're getting off the phone, we're like, that person is dope. Like, I very reaffirmed the decision to partner with them over this long journey to build these big companies. And they're exceptionally good at these things. And then you start to, in aggregate, to date, we have 32 companies in our portfolio, and that's 32, sets of founders. I think it's somewhere like up to like 50 people that are actually in charge of what they're building. And maybe it's not something you see in finance often, but we take a very holistic approach to the human. It's like, well, if you're going through some shit in your personal life, that's going to affect what you're doing in your professional life, and how you're showing up as a leader, and how you're executing against your plan. So it's not completely altruistic, but we do care about, but it's from a strategic standpoint. It's like, well, what if we, created something in like a summer camp format that we're all familiar with, that kind of takes us back to our childhood? What if we rooted it in this idea of self-care and wellness, and disconnecting from the daily grind of, startup life? And, who do we know that is really dope, that already does shit like this, which is, clearly the best person on the planet is Devi Brown. And how can we convince her and her awesome partner in crime to come kick it with us for a weekend and reconnect with ourselves? So fast forward, we were able to do that. We're extremely grateful, to have you there and to kind of like set the tone. But I think one of the, I would say, unintended consequences that we were kind of hoping would happen is that folks would just organically connect with each other.
Yeah.
And built a community of dope people that were all at similar stages of their startup life, but all had very different lived experiences that led them to build whatever product or service that they were looking to build and change the game with, but also very specific things that they were good at that other people could use help with, and then build this organic community, which we could not be more proud of the quality of human. We're reminded about the quality of the humans that we backed, reminded about the things that they're building that exist in the world that have massive economic opportunity, but impact the human narrative in a more positive and equitable way. And by the way, we don't see that as charity or an impact orientation that implies some sort of concessionary return. We think that this is the next wave of generating tens of hundreds of billions of dollars of wealth for the people that we back, for the people that they employ at the earliest stage. Because if they're successful, there's a lot, as we've seen over the last 10, 15 years, there's a lot of people that have become very wealthy. That percentage of through the innovation, primarily through the development of these new technology companies. But if you actually look under the hood of who gets to participate in that wealth, it's not representative of the wider society. So when we go back to why we exist, it's to, have that perspective represented in the market. And then hopefully we can create a standard moving forward where other people view this as a massive opportunity the way that we do and, want to follow suit.
One of my favorite things, before I move us into space I'm very excited about, one of my favorite things when I came up for the retreat, I think, where were we? We were in near Yosemite?
We were in the Scotts Valley, which was in the Redwood Forest.
Yes, we were in a redwood forest. It was glorious. Listen, find me in a forest. One of the things that I loved is I remember on the first day, we came down for dinner and it was the introduction. And, I just kind of planted myself with everyone, right? So I was sitting down at a table and everyone was trying to work and eat while we were in the center of a forest, right? Everyone was just so connected to still the grind, which is, to your point, a big part of why you wanted to take everyone out to the forest. So I remember the first conversation at dinner was just, okay, who are you? What do you do? How do you do it? This, what I do. Everyone dove immediately into their elevator pitch. And then I sat there and I think I was making people a little uncomfortable because I was like, oh, hi. Yeah, I'm just existing. And they're like, what's going on? And then by our last day there, seeing the real deep magic of what, remembering that you're a person too, outside of what you're currently contributing, how you're currently serving, or ways that you're currently trying to scale. Watching that remembrance come over everyone as they are building some of the most incredible companies, and executing massive visions, but then seeing that conversation come back into being one that was more soul-led and watching people open up at the tables and talk about their families and really just talk about what brought them pleasure, seeing people run out to the hot tub parties at night and, then taking walks in silence during the day. And it just, for me as a teacher, it was so beautiful to watch that begin to pour over people. Because to your point, what's the point of any of it if you can't be a whole person? What's the point of all the cash, the accolades, any of it, if you don't feel good about who and what you are inside, if you're not able to slow down enough to be present with your experience in real time? A lot of people, I think right now, have been, especially, with social media and with us being in some of the more hustle culture that we're coming out of, especially for the last decade, this hustle entrepreneurial culture where it was kind of I'm an entrepreneur, you're a 9-to-5er, we're at war, we're judging each other, we're this. It's been fascinating to watch, but coming into this space where, what does any of it mean? What does any of it mean if you're not connecting to the experience of being a spirit in human form? That's the point. So you recently had this very cool experience, and I'm talking about it because you posted it on your Instagram. So share as much as you feel comfortable with. But you had this really awesome experience to have dinner and be in community with, what are the descriptives of this being that has changed the course of human history? With Barack Obama. with
Yeah.
our forever president, Barack Obama. And you had quite an interesting backstory to this as well that kind of made it not just an exceptional moment, but also a full circle moment. What was that experience like with you?
Obviously, the work that we're doing with Slauson Co. I mentioned we had some really incredible, like, day one advisors, and one of those is a man named Ron Conway, who's like a legendary, Silicon Valley figure, early investor in like some of the biggest companies of the past, 3 decades plus,
Mm.
and someone who is incredibly just legendary in every aspect, not just as an investor, but as a human and as a connector. He was hosting a founder summit up in San Francisco, and was going to be interviewing, President Obama as his kind of keynote chat, and offered us an opportunity to meet with him for a short period of time, but privately alongside Valerie Jarrett, who's a day one advisor who, we've had the pleasure of getting to know over the past few months, and more so through the lens of learning about the work that they're doing with the Obama Foundation and sharing the work that we're doing with Slauson Co. You know, Philanthropic a lot of ways on that side and more for profit on our side, but nevertheless rooted in a lot of the same values. And the purpose was really just to share and to listen on both sides. So if nothing else, it was just another signal of validation that we're on the right path and we're building, obviously have the utmost respect for what that team, Valerie and President Obama and that entire administration, and even beyond the time in the White House has done for the world, both tactically through programs and policies, but also just through the representation and the intention.
Someone with a lot of output, someone that has also shared that there was, quite the climb to this life, right? Internally and externally. Quite the digging, quite the climb. How do you connect to joy and pleasure in this moment of your life?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, for me, it's just, instituting all of the right practice. I think at this point, I just celebrated my 39th birthday. So I'm highly reflective of like what this next now 10 months is leading up to the next decade of my life. And, we talked about the toolbox overflowing with gadgets and approaches, and really taking the time
Batman belt, all the utility
to slow down and to find time to I think with one of the challenges when you take on the level of responsibility that we take on is making sure that there's time that you have dedicated for yourself, so you can be a better partner or husband or father or son or friend. And I think the thing that I've really just in the early stages and still figuring out is just making time to slow down, take care of my body, listening to my body, meditating, being mindful of my thoughts, not feeling like doing my best to not beat myself up for having thoughts that I thought that I wouldn't be thinking anymore after doing all of the work that I've done to date, without realizing that this is an ongoing journey and I get to be grateful that I even have the awareness to notice these passing thoughts. And, so I think it's the things that are, making the time to be silent, waking up a little bit earlier, extending the time that I sit in silence and reflection, being more gentle. I recently just over the last few months have been dealing with my first like real adult injury, and like being grateful for that injury, that it happened the way that it happened when it happened. So now at this point in my life where I'm still relatively young and, have the ability to course correct some things, I can, so I think it's really just the greatest tool that's admittedly still the hardest thing for me to practice is that whole gratitude thing. But it's something that I get to remind myself of, and particularly in these forums, in these conversations.
It's so interesting to hear you say Because you're actually one of the most grateful people I know.
Yeah, shit is hard though.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And part of the reason of saying it and practicing it, or even pretending like you're practicing it, is to, become it.
Yeah.
So
live it.
one day. Today is that one day. But tomorrow might not be. And that's cool.
Deep presence.
Yep.
At the end of every show, I like to ask my guest to provide some soul work for the audience. So soul work is, for those who are listening, a way to really deepen in their own process, their own practices that they're doing at home from your lens. So sometimes that can be done as sharing a practice, or that can be done as sharing a prompt for self-reflection, something to really kind of have the space to sink your teeth into. Perhaps those listening might journal to it later, meditate on the thought, take a walk with the thought. So I'd like to invite you in this moment, as we get ready to close out the show, to share some soul work with the audience. What is something that they can take with them to practice and apply right now?
A lot of what I've been thinking about these last few years is, as I think about my ultimate goal and what I view as success, and something that I try to strive for on a daily basis, is like, I view what success to me is being 100% comfortable in my own skin 100% of the time. And I think that, man, woman, whatever, however you identify or wherever you kind of come from, being able to be yourself in any given scenario, in any given situation. And I think we've, in this age of the internet and social media and social comparison being built into business models, and, insecurity being bred as a, just through human psychology, and us effectively being exploited by these different products and services that do connect us in some ways, but then also have, as we're starting to see, psychological detriments, across all age spectrums. The question that I am, or the statement that I'm constantly coming back to is, your lived experience is your competitive advantage. And I think through the lens of the prompt, the question that I ask myself whenever I start to feel any type of insecurity or regret or doubt is, if not me, then who? So it's a practice in confidence. It doesn't necessarily, it's not a practice in fake confidence. It does cause you to ask real questions about what it is that you're doing, addressing certain aspects of fear that, I think a lot of people refer to fear as fake. And to an extent, I agree with that. I do feel like fear serves a purpose. Going back to the beginning of this conversation, is a lot of the things that exist, quite candidly, that I get to work on, at least my contribution for them, a healthy chunk of their existence my contribution to their existence has been my personal fear. And I'm grateful for that fear, because now these things exist. Now, so I don't know if I have like a overall headline or a specific prompt, but it's somewhere in that. But I think it's ultimately, whether you're creating something that is completely brand new, which is going to require you to be some level of contrarian and have to, if life is a game of enrollment, in that case, you have to enroll, whether it's investors or customers or whatever the product is, the end beneficiary is. Or if you're just taking a spin on something that already exists, that's a commodity, and putting your own touch to it, or applying your own layer of design or creativity or perspective or words and intention, or the community you want to build around it, your lived experience is your competitive advantage. So
yeah, that's really powerful. And what I'm hearing in that prompt, and maybe for those connecting to our voices right now, it's, what are some ways to reframe or amplify the ways you've been relating to your life's experiences to really see some advantage in it? For some of the darker rooms, that might that might be something you want to explore over the course of this next year, or also explore, with someone that you may be doing some self-work with. But what are the ways that your life experiences have become, or can become your competitive advantage in your life? And competitive doesn't have to be professionally, but what are some of the ways that they get to emerge as gifts, as superpowers, as, muscle memory, innate skills?
I believe for me, in this exact moment, which is all that we have, and this could very well change if I am driving in traffic and somebody pisses me off and brings out an old version of me, is I'm grateful for every single experience that has brought me up until this point.
Yeah.
And everything as like minute as missing an exit or making a turn, the wrong turn, or, like every little decision and action and interaction. And I'm not just talking about the good ones, I'm talking about the bad ones. Things that you thought were meant for you, or somebody that you lost, or everything that just seems like, God, why me? Why is this happening to me? Is, if you choose and if you can remember to like believe that all of this shit is relative, if there's you can't have all the ups without the downs, or the wins without the L's. I mean, it makes everything so much better. And it's so hard, I mean, it's not because somebody can intellectualize it and tell you, and you can get your gratitude journal and you can write all of it down, but you got to practice that shit, because that's the only way that it'll act. And all of the other things, somehow everything just becomes enough. And then at that point, more and more opportunity and the things that you like. But you got to put the work in for whatever it is that you want to exist, whether it's like a partner, not like I got to find this very specific partner, or I got to have kids by a certain age, or all of these deadlines and expectations that we put on ourselves. Or I got to make $1 million before I'm 12. It's like all of it is much more, it's just a better experience if you can go through the exercise of implementing some sort of like, I'm grateful for this shit right now in your life.
Yeah. Really beautifully said. AJ, thank you. Thank you for coming on this show. Thank you for the work that you do in the world. Thank you for the work you've committed to do on yourself, which allows you to be the magnificent, radiant, brilliant being you are to all the people whose lives that you touch.
Appreciate you.